My name is Victor Wyant, and I'm a forester that works here on the Andrew Pickens district with the Sumter National Forest, the U.S. Forest Service. What's known as a silviculturalist, who's kind of a specialized kind of arm of forestry that writes the management plans and looks at the forest composition and structure and tries to figure out what to do with the vegetation. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about past, present, future management, talk about restoration. I'm going to zoom way out to a national scale, then I'm going to zoom back into the Andrew Pickens, okay? Because I want to set some context for what do we do on the National Forest, why do we do it, and a lot of that ties in with the Forest Service mission. So that's why I'm going to zoom out. And I want to kind of look back in time at, how we started, what we used to do, what we do now. Kind of like how Forrest Gump says, there's a lot you can tell a person by their shoes. Where are they going? Where are they been? Right? And so I think there's some value in doing that. I'm going to focus on our current era of restoration and the context of when I'm talking about management. I'm really talking about forest management, vegetation management. I'm not really talking about like special use permits or the infrastructure or outdoor recreation, that kind of thing. I'm talking about the vegetation and forestry side of things. So a little bit of historical context here. A number of you have probably heard of Gifford Pinchot and Theodore Roosevelt and their efforts in conservation, John Muir and some others. Dr. Franklin Howell, who's heard of him? Yeah, I didn't remember him either. He made a huge impact on the setting aside of forest reserves back in the late 1800s with a paper, that Cultivation of Timber and Preservation of Forests. He got the ear of Congress. There was a lot of people who were making this effort, though. That there was a lot of recognition that the timber resource was essentially being mined, not being replenished, and Dr. Howell was able to get Congress's ear in a big way that eventually led to the Forest Reserve Act and the Organic Act. Okay, and those two acts, the Forest Reserve Act let us set aside the forest reserves. They eventually became the National Forest, and the Organic Act is what kind of set the direction. Then a little bit later, the Forest Service was established, and then a little bit later on, the Weeks Law let the government buy back private lands for the creation of national forests, and that's how a lot of our national forests in the East came to be. So I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything as I'm jumping slides, so if I look down here and take a pause, that's what I'm doing. But the Organic Act, so I'm pulling some quotes out of some of these documents and from some of these people. What I want to get at here was we started with the idea of setting aside these reserves. A lot of them were already cut over lands. But the idea was to set aside that resource for future use and protect the water resource. Okay? So from the get-go, the idea was it would be used. I mentioned about President Roosevelt, huge impact both on the creation of national forests and national parks. Gifford Pinchot, major player with the National Forest System. Again, a quote from him about basically sustained use. So he's talking about conservation. He's not talking about just going out there and taking whatever you want and forgetting about the rest, but he is talking about use. Greatest good, greatest number, longest time. So meanwhile, it was in this kind of the same time period, the national parks were getting up and going, okay? This idea of protecting special places. John Muir was a hero in this area, father of national parks. A lot of his focus was set aside of lands to be left untouched, okay, to be left unmanaged. Different focus than what Pinchot and the others were doing with the forest reserves. And I'm not a historian, so I'm just grabbing bits and pieces of history here to set context, but they were contemporaries, Muir and Pinchot, and they had a lot of the same debates about land use as we do today, about, should it be left alone, should it be left to itself, should it be managed, how much should be cut, where, etc. They had a lot of the same debates. Park Service came about here with these acts. Yellowstone being the first. Muir's big footprint initially was the Yosemite. He had a huge influence there. There's a lot more of this that's described in this. There's a book and there's a DVD called The Greatest Good. Actually, you can watch it online for free. It's a great watch. I highly encourage you to check it out. So our missions today, I'm drawing these comparisons here because of where I'm going about the Forest Service and why we do what we do. So Park Service essentially is, I won't say it's a totally hands-off, because I know they do prescribed burning and such, but the idea is basically just you leave it to do its thing. Forest Service multi-use. And then a little bit more information about the two systems, how big they are. The working forest on the Forest Service, it's the idea of, you're going to do timber management, you're going to do wildlife, you're going to do other things. So about 75% of the Under Pickens district is working forest. Some examples of areas that would not be that would be the Ellicott Rock Wilderness, the Chattooga River Corridor. There's some management in there, but it's not like the way the rest of the district is zoned. So a change in focus over time from that initial start about the forest reserves that I mentioned about, it was water, it was for the water resource, it was for the sustained timber resource, but that focus has changed over time with the Forest Service. So, and I'm just trying to get up here to where I'm supposed to be. There it is. It started off with a resource protection kind of a thing. Sort of the wild, wild west kind of era there of just trying to keep people from just taking and doing what they wanted on national forest, and then you're getting forestry established. That was a big part of that initial effort. Then we get into the World War II time period, and we're post-World War II and the baby boomers and the demand for wood. The national forests were called on to supply that. Whether the private sector could have done it on their own or not, I don't know. But the national forests were called upon to step up and get into a lot more of a production mode, and the agency responded. Multiple use came about later on as we started getting a lot more involvement from the public on other uses of the forest that weren't just, resource extraction. Then we got later on into ecosystem management, looking at sort of the whole and restoration. And I'm going to talk about these in more detail. Reasons for the change, public interest and needs, and new information from research and new ideas. And that's a recurring theme over and over. It seems like every week I come in from my job, there's something new coming from the research community. There's something new about what the public's wanting. And, it's not always that we do everything research says, not always we do everything the public wants, but these interests drive what we do and how we change our management over time. So going to that past management and going back to that post-World War II era, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what I'm going to call the regulated forest, okay, the classic forestry, the stuff that Pinchot brought over from Europe. This was the idea of maximizing production. You manage on a rotation. There's still, I remember when I started with the agency 20 years ago, there's still that vocabulary and those conversations in the hallways. What kind of rotation you on? What kind, and there's nothing wrong with it. It was a different emphasis then, and it was the sustained, predictable yield of a product, a wood product. And that was really what was driving our management. There were other things going on. There were other, wildlife things or whatever, but these were the drivers. The species to manage was just kind of based on what the markets wanted. Disturbance such as fire and insects, etc., that was a nuisance. You wanted to control that stuff. Fire, bad. Put them out. If a fire burns your stand, get back in there and replant it. We want trees, trees, trees. Okay? Then. Research, a lot of it was just focused on helping us grow more trees. So just a little picture here, going around the wheel from kind of clockwise. If you start like with a bare site, you can start wherever you want. But say you do a harvest, and then with a regulated forest, you're going to prepare your site, you're going to plant, and then you're going to take that forest up through a series of stages where you're thinning it or tending it over time until you get back to a final harvest. And you just keep repeating that. And you repeat that across the landscape where you've got, in any given time, you've got different stands of different ages. And so you got that sustained supply of wood. The other ecosystem benefits were sort of nice to have, but they really weren't the driver of the management. And there's an example of, plantation forestry. And again, I'm not here to knock plantation forestry. It has to do with what the objectives of the landowner are. This is what the Forest Service was doing then. Okay? So this is what led to what we have today with thousands of acres of pine plantations on the district, and our management focus has changed. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We get into multiple use. And that's where we started accommodating, more formally, I guess, accommodating other resource concerns. What about the critters? What about the birds? What about the fish? What about this and that and the other? We brought on interdisciplinary teams, brought on the ecologists, as we call them, the fish biologists and the hydrologists. And we didn't have that team of specialists in the agency before as employees within the agency. Multiple use is still applicable, but a lot of what it led to was kind of a management or no management. The timber people just kind of looked for the easy areas that weren't zoned to have restrictions or whatever. It was that's like set aside, got wildlife limitations. Let's go over and manage here because we don't have the limitations in this part of the forest. And the management on the wildlife side tended to be towards single species, and that's not a bad thing. Like the bald eagle recovery is a great story of that, but it was not as probably holistic as we're looking today with the ecosystem focus. It was an area of a lot of analysis, learning how to do a lot of the analysis. The research was focused on effects, a lot of focus on effects of management. Let me just catch up to my current slide here. And so we get into where we are today with the ecosystem management, where we're talking more systems-based thinking, interconnectedness, looking at things from a landscape perspective. Tools like GIS have come about, which make this a lot easier. The ecological restoration, a little different than what we think about, like with restoration, like say with a car. That's trying to put that 1957 Chevy, to put it back like it was. Ecological restoration, a lot of times we get hung up in thinking we're trying to put things back exactly like they were. And that's just not possible. For example, American chestnut. American chestnut was dominant on this landscape. We're not going to get that back, at least not in my lifetime probably. Now, it'd be great to be able to plant some back, and I'm looking forward to it. If research comes out and says we got a blight-resistant strain, we're ready. But the point is we can't put all of those pieces back. Top predators, wolves, mountain lions, don't see us putting those back on our landscape anytime soon. So we work with what we can with this ecological restoration, try to create as many components as what were there. Big change in the focus. The focus now is on environmental objectives. In the past, we were accommodating environmental concerns concerned about this wildlife species, about that plant species. It was, yeah, but I'm trying to do my timber management. Okay, I want to do my regulated forest, and okay, I'll accommodate your special thing here for your critter, but I'm doing my regulated thing here. Now we're focusing on these environmental objectives are driving the project rather than the regulated forest. Okay. Existing versus desired conditions. We're looking at condition management, what's there, what should be there. Timber harvest is a means to an end. It's not the end in of itself. Disturbance is looked at differently now. Fire is our friend, not our foe. The other disturbances play into that as well. The desired conditions, Joe's going to get into a lot of this ecological classification stuff and how that helps us. Research is helping us to understand kind of what fits on the landscape from a natural standpoint, from an ecological standpoint. Natural range of variability kind of helps us define our sideboards. Okay. Succession, I'm going to get into that in a little bit. That's basically just different stages of forest development, different kinds of structure. So I've got an example of the desired condition. So we're going to start with a loblolly pine existing condition. Loblolly pine is not native to the Andrew Pickens district. It was planted back when? Regulated forest. So we got good wood out there. And if you want to go ahead and hop back by clicking on this link. Previous slide. Back there. All right, so let's go. I'm going to show you 3 examples of desired condition. We'd like to change that loblolly pine plantation to a mature shortleaf pine oak forest one of these days, okay? Or an upland hardwood stand, okay? Okay, now don't click on the next slide yet. This is a shortleaf pine. This is more of an open shortleaf pine forest. Now just click on the word here, on the text. There you go. Now go to the next slide. There you go. Another example, white pine plantation, existing condition. All right, now click on the words. Okay, and so white pine, we got this thing right now where we're in the process of planning this project. We've had some public involvement. We're still working through it. Had some great comments. Really appreciate them. And we're working through that right now. What we're saying is, looking at this ecological classification stuff that Joe's going to tell us some about. I'm setting you up, huh? Yeah. Is we're saying some of those stands are off-site. They don't fit from an ecological standpoint. They need to be converted to vegetation that fits that site. They're drier sites, frequent fire, doesn't fit white pine. Some of those sites, white pine fits perfectly. We're going to continue to managing for white pine, but let's break up that plantation some to get some more diversity in the structure and the species. So desired condition 1 is shortleaf pine oak again, because we're saying white pine is off-site. Okay, click on the word. Okay, desired condition 2, an example of breaking up of white pine plantation to get some more uneven age structure in there, more varied canopy structure, different ages of trees and such. So back on the link, and then I think I got it now. Let's see. Whoop, that's all right. So succession, I won't get into this very deep because these guys are going to go a lot further with it, but the idea that you have some kind of a disturbance, could be a timber harvest, fire, tornado, whatever, and then it's going to take time for that forest to recover. Same idea when I just talked about taking a loblolly pine plantation and converting it to, I just showed you the desired condition. It's like, wait a minute, how's that going to happen? I can't just go and pluck off the loblolly pine trees and then put a mature, mixed pine hardwood forest on there. That takes time. Okay, and that's what this is about. It's time to get there. So then, tools of the trade that we use, timber harvest. You can see what they are up there. Those are some of the tools that are involved. There's other tools, I suppose, like grazing, for example, but we don't really do that on the Andrew Pickens. Probably the most important one is the one at the bottom, and the one that I struggle with the most, which is why I'm glad Robbie's my boss, because he's better at it than I am. But timber harvest is a way to change to make a big impact in a relatively short period of time. I mean, we can take a mature forest and we can turn it into a young forest, like that, right? Planting, of course, we know what that does. A new forest gets established. Prescribed fire, what that can do is that can treat a big chunk of acres, unlike a timber harvest where we can't go do, thousands of acres. Like a prescribed fire, they can burn 1,500 acres in one day. We wouldn't do that with timber harvest. But their impact is less, it's a lesser impact. With fire, it's more of a repeated type of a thing. It's more of a finessing type of a thing, maintaining conditions or driving conditions to change slowly. Herbicides, we use those for changing the species mix, changing the structure, invasive species treatments, other things as well. Point out on the herbicides, I know there's a lot of controversy in the press right now on herbicides, and I wish we could have had an herbicide person come and speak, but they're wasn't able to make that happen. But just follow up with us on that, and we'd be happy to work through any concerns, issues on herbicides. And then some of the other tools. So again, desired conditions take time. I started with that pine plantation I didn't want. I harvest, I got young forest, mid-age, mature, old growth, etc. And then I want to point out, and I just need you one more time click on young forest. As we move along that journey from that harvest, that disturbance, to getting back to that mature forest, the stages we go through along the way are also the desired condition. The desired condition is not an end state. The desired condition is the steps along the way as well, and we want those sprayed across the landscape because different animals use each one of these in different ways, and I won't get into all that because that's coming later. But each one of these is really important from an ecological standpoint. Go ahead and click on the link. Go back. Okay, and then mid-age forest, same idea. It's a step along the way to the mature forest, but it's important. And then back again, and then now I got it. Thank you. So a couple of other structures that I'm talking about here, woodlands and savannah. You see some good examples of at least a start with that just right across the road over here. We've got right where the roads come together at the stop sign, kind of catty corner, you'll see where there's been some timber harvest. It's opened up a lot in there, and we're trying to get a woodlands restored. The trick with that has been that ground cover, because with the woodlands you want an open forest with a grass forbs dominated understory, and it's hard to control the sprouts. We're working on that. Wes is going to take care of it for us soon, hopefully, with some prescribed burning. But savannah, kind of a savannah-like situation we've got over here with these garland brush fields. Those are old apple orchards that the Forest Service acquired, and we're maintaining those for open, early succession. You'll hear that word, or habitat. So yeah, those are some examples of things that we would not have done back in the day of the regulated forest. Okay, regulated forest, we would have planted trees as soon as we got those properties. Here's an example of the woodlands, savannah. So where to manage, where not to manage, ecological departure, how far off are we from the desired condition, too much or too little of something, what do we have too much and too little on the landscape, how practical is it to implement. I'm zooming through because I got the little nod there. So we're trying to balance these types of forest and structures of forest out there. Right now we're very heavy on that mid-age closed canopy forest, a lot of that. We are very low on old growth, on woodlands, savannas, and that early succession. So we're really low on the extremes of the structures. We need a lot more of the young stuff and a lot more of the old stuff. Okay? I'm going to skip that for right now. Sustainability no longer is about sustained wood flow. It's about sustaining these conditions across the landscape because they are dynamic and they change. Okay? And that's just one last, almost the end here. I just want to say that's one thing that's hard for us to get used to because we live next to a forest, and in our lifetime we think that's the way it always is, but they're dynamic and they change. And to do ecological restoration, we have to be willing to say, okay, look, it's not always going to be this way. There's some percentages of what we do on our district as far as sustainability with timber harvest and prescribed burning. And I think I'm just about done here. So just a little example. I'm out. Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's it then. So, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks.